Howdy guys, how are you guys doing? I am so excited because today we have a brand new video and I'm gonna show you in a second what video I'm talking about. Because I was gonna go to gym, man. I was planning my day out. I was going to the gym, trying to be productive, and then Kraut decides to upload a new video. Kraut has done a lot when it comes to my channel. I have multiple reactions to his documentary series that, have been fairly successful. And I just feel, I want to watch this. I'm going to watch this anyways. But what's better than watching this alone? Watching this with you guys. So this video is brand new. It has like hours. I don't know. I don't know how many. Like, it has like literally, it's a brand new video. All right. So I decided, let me do a stream with you guys and let's watch this video together, and then again, you can have the video itself on the channel for the ones that couldn't join us on the stream. This is kind of random. So what do you guys think, huh? All right, let's see. Let's wait a few people to join. You guys can also comment. I'm not showing the chat really on the screen right now because I'm still learning, man. I really don't know how. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, but hey, we got 4 playbacks, 1 concurrent viewer, which I guess we got 1 viewer on the past. And we're going to start really, really soon. All right? You know what? Let's just go for it, man. So we have China versus India. I don't really know what this video is going to be about. I do know that China and India, as 2 large powers, have had a lot of issues, especially now with water. I've heard the Himalayan mountain chain is a big problem for them because of the amount of water it has. I think, but again, I'm not really like lectured about the whole thing. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the video is going to be about. So without further ado, and again, I have a second screen here to look at your comments and again watch this literally together. So let's just try to go for it. All right, China versus India.
This video is sponsored by Synthetic.
And by the way, this is a video for Kraut. He is the original creator, so all the credits go for him and to him. Oh shit, you know what? I have a little problem on the stream. Monetization is off, my dude. Let's put it on. Let's make some money. Alright, man. Yeah, let me just, streaming is not the same as making videos. I think it's harder. But yeah, let's just go.
Synthetic Notes was created by a software engineer and small business owner called Liam, who works a lot with CNC machines. While working
all right, well, we can skip that.
Exams for a book, something list as possible, making a version of your own device rather than monthly subscription out. Therefore, you can trust Synthetic in a way. Description: the discount code creating a lot of this course.
All right. Oh my god, I'm excited, man. I'm way more excited than I should be.
When you read outdated history and political science books, you will sometimes find the term Eurocratic state. This term was used by historians, anthropologists, and political scientists.
Wait, by the way, I have a lot of questions. Like, who is this man? Who is Kraut? Where is he from? I don't think he's from the States because he has like an accent that's very subtle, but he still has an accent. I don't really know where he's from. But I don't know, if you guys know anything about him, let me know.
Describe the concept of the state. And the state, in their worldview, was something that Europeans had invented in ancient Greece. But we know today that this is incorrect. The first states were created by someone else, and if we were to use an accurate term, it should be the Sinocratic state. Ancient China as a term refers to 5 eras of Chinese history. The Yang Shao period and Longshan period from 500 BC to 3000 BC are largely archaeological with close to no written...
That is true. This is something important. Sorry if you're hearing any noise. I have my pup right here. Say hello. Of course, like a good Mexican, I have a Chihuahua, but I'm just gonna let her go. In Mexico, when you look at history and when you get taught history, it's always on a Eurocentric manner. It's not like you learn a lot from China, from the Indus River Valley civilization, even from the civilizations from the Mesopotamia Valley. Is it a valley? It's not. I don't know, but we don't really get to know a lot about China, despite being so rich when it comes to history and culture.
Reliable records. The three dynasties period from 2000 to 700 BC with the Xia, Shang and Western Zhou dynasties. The spring and autumn period from 770 to 460 BC and the Warring States period from 460 to 221 BC. During the Xia dynasty is when we started to see the first state structures of China emerge. Less states as we know and understand it, but more little fiefdoms of family clans that organized their own little states with ever-increasing centralization. This is not to be understood as a sudden transformation, but a slow and gradual process taking place over centuries. By the late Zhou period, these states started to establish large bureaucracies, collected taxes, introduced currencies, organized standing armies, and used standardized measurements and units. The political force that drove the shaping of the first Chinese state was, however, not internal political or economical development, but war.
Okay.
During the spring and autumn period, which lasted 294 years, 1,211 wars were fought, with only 38 total years of peace and the destruction and conquest of 110 individual state entities.
America
In the following
approves.
254 years of the Warring States period, the remaining 23 state entities continued to fight 468 wars with only 89 total years of peace, and the destruction of 16 state entities, with only 7 remaining. These 548 years of constant war are unique in human history for their duration and the enormous numbers of peoples killed. While Rome was still a collection of huts, tens of thousands were dying in China as ever-efficient state organizations sent standing armies into battles in attempts to dominate over all of China. The way this period shaped China can be almost understood in Darwinian terms of the evolutionary process. Chinese warfare prior to this period had been dominated by chariots whose riders had to fire arrows, an extremely difficult skill to acquire, which resulted in one state opting for easier to train and cheaper cavalry instead, gaining with it an upper hand until others adopted cavalry too. In military terms, this led to competition over who could run the most effective yet cheap army, resulting in the invention of conscription, standardized army units, and eventually even the formation of an officer corps of military leaders promoted on the basis of merit rather than family lineage or noble standing. War also affected civil development, in that all these state entities competed over who could run the most efficient state to support their war efforts. States started to tax land and harvests, not on the basis of kin group, but on the basis of land and harvest size. Population surveys were introduced to keep count of potential recruits. Conscription offices established, field irrigation and land management offices established, and just as with the army, a system of meritocracy was introduced that produced state bureaucrats hired and promoted on the basis of merit rather than family ties. Intellectually, the Warring States period produced writers such as Mo Tzu, Sun Tzu, Han Fei, Zhuan Xi, and Confucius, who was known in the West as Confucius, and produced the 5 great classics compiled during the late Zhou dynasty: the Xi Ling, the Li Xi, the Shu Jing, Ai Jing, and Zhuan Qi. These intellectuals often wandered between different states and helped structure and build different states while writing their philosophies. Through this, literacy became a cornerstone of Chinese administration and society earlier than in any other civilizations, which created a wealthy intellectual heritage on statesmanship and warfare that would become a national treasure and the foundation
Of course,
of
The Art
Chinese
of War
education
is a
and
classic.
statesmanship for millennia to come. As these warring states continued to battle each other and weed each other out over the course of 500 years in a process of survival of the fittest, the state that eventually came out as the most innovative and efficient to then conquer all and unify China was the state of Qin. What happened in particular during the late Zhou period is the creation of the first social structures that we can call a state. Entities with standing armies that ruled territory, bureaucracies that collected taxes and enforced laws, systems of unified weights and measurement, and created public infrastructure like roads, grain silos, canals, irrigation systems, courts and dikes. Among these states, the Qin would ultimately succeed in unifying China due to one political development that it enforced the strictest: meritocratic legalism. It promoted and hired military officers and generals on the basis of their record and merit, rather than on family ties. The first unified Chinese state that emerged out of the unification and conquest of multiple
Güey,
small
estaba
states
viendo
was a
el juego del
strict
calamar y vi que
legalist
Oh, sorry about
meritocracy.
that.
And even though that meritocracy had succeeded in unifying China, it ultimately came into conflict with another core structure of Chinese society, one that had lost this first conflict of unifying China: the Confucian family.
Right, so I think the whole meritocracy thing, it's important, right? And we saw a little bit of that in, for example, the Napoleon video on Oversimplified, how before him people were hired on kind of the, you know, the status of your family, right? For example, I'm sorry about. I think the quality of the stream is poor right now. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, it's hugely important. And remember, this was before Napoleon, okay? This was way before Napoleon. So we're talking about a really modern state, and we can really imagine not only how early this was, but how advanced for the time it was. I mean, it's massive, and I'm so embarrassed that I don't know more about China and its culture and its history, because it's one of the most interesting bits in the world, in the planet. Forget about interesting; it's important. China has shaped a lot our modern society, and it still is. You know, China, it's still a giant. Now we're talking about India.
We have far less sources to pinpoint and tell the story of early India, since there are close to no written records. What little text we have is religious, from which we do know that the Brahmanic religions played an important role in the creation of the first social structures of India. A society of castes developed, called the Varna. These consisted of the highest priest caste, called the Brahmins, then the warrior and ruler castes, the Kshatris, farmers and merchants in the Vaishyas castes, and servants within the Shudras caste. All of these castes were divided into subcastes called the Jatis, and beneath all of them were the untouchables, divided into Daltis, Hajans, and Pariahs. And therein lies an enormous difference between the political development of China and India. China never had a state religion out of which the political structures of society formed. Things such as the famous mandate of heaven were less religious concepts as they were state concepts tied to the Chinese social contract. In ancient India, it was religion that structured society and ultimately political development. The elite Brahmin castes did not hold any coercive military or economic power. Instead, they held the symbolic and metaphysical power over ritual and law. The Brahmins also restricted literacy to their own castes, limiting knowledge of religion and law to themselves. Literacy was important in the creation of the first Chinese state and the creation of states in general. It forms the foundation of bureaucracy and the government order through writing orders. Being the only ones who could read did not only mean that the Brahmins had a monopoly on interpreting religious texts and law, but also meant no centralized state could emerge. and the aristocratic and warrior castes also willingly subordinated themselves to the Brahmin caste. Social and economic mobility was additionally severely restricted. If you were born into
Sounds
a specific
familiar?
jati, say a lumber worker, you had to become a lumber worker. You could also only marry someone from a lumber worker family.
Wow.
This system makes the seeking out of further education as well as innovation an unnecessary burden, as any further education outside of one's jati is unnecessary. Many historical materialists have made the mistake of describing this Indian society as a replica of European feudalism or as a mere economic structure. But the Brahmin caste in Indian society was an elite without any economic power. Most economic power lay with the lower jatis. A Brahmin who even just looked at a member of the untouchable castes had to undergo an extensive religious ritual of self-purification, in essence punishing the elite for interacting with the bottom of society. The elites of this society additionally were barred from commerce, yet the lower castes still had enormously restrictive rules enforced upon them which limited their ability to rise through the ranks of society, even if they managed to gather wealth. The religious texts of the Brahmin class also clearly outline that the kings did not own their subjects, but only gained legitimacy through service to the higher castes. All of this makes no sense when applying the standards of historical materialism when interpreting history. For this rigid social structure to make sense, one has to remove one's modern, secular and materialistic lenses and see this society for what it truly was, a religious society built around religion. Brahmic religions see sentient existence as a false perception of reality, and the goal of life is to dedicate oneself not to finding and constructing an identity within the false perception of reality, but ridding oneself of all impediments to finding the true reality behind sentient existence. And from within the internal logic of the Brahmic religions, this social structure makes perfect sense. Everything associated with the present life, be it the burying of bodies, the butchering of animals, pollution, childbirth, down to the barber, was left to ever-decreasing castes, seen as increasingly impure by how deep their professions were tied into the present life. Through this arrangement, members of lower castes are in fact able to acquire wealth through having monopolies on services such as the ritual cremation of the dead. Upper castes were seen as pure due to them being freed from the need of having to interact with the gritty dealings of the present life that the lower castes interacted with. However, they relied almost entirely upon the lower castes to fulfill these duties for them, and the system of faith that kept it all in place was a belief in karma. If one fulfilled one's social role, one could expect rebirth into a higher caste. In essence, social mobility did exist in this ancient Indian society, but only in the afterlife. The Brahmin castes never centralized around one powerful institution across several princely states like the medieval Catholic Church. Instead, they remained decentralized within each of the emergent Indian kingdoms. They owned no land holdings, couldn't raise armies, and were through this completely interdependent upon the ruler castes and the lower castes. What came to be in India was a
I could
very
imagine
unique
so.
system of society which was strictly separated and segregated, but in which each and every single segment was completely dependent upon all the others and could not act without the others. This was a society with a hierarchy and rules that forced everyone within that hierarchy to cooperate, creating a social dynamic in which the lower castes had substantial leverage and negotiating power, which restricted elites from doing as they pleased. The military structure of these kingdoms strictly reflected the caste hierarchies. Because of this, mobilization of military forces was slow, and military rank was mostly determined by caste or bloodline. New military tactics and modern equipment were shunned. The fact that the Indian kingdoms never adopted cavalry archers, or the fact that they never gave up on using war elephants long after they were rendered ineffective by
War
pikes,
elephants.
horse archers and gunpowder,
That's badass,
who
bro.
modernized its military structure into a merit-based system, is why India was unable to defend itself from Greek, Persian, Hunnic and Islamic invasions in the coming centuries. but it also meant that internal expansion by individual Indian states was limited, unlike
Right. I I don't remember where I read this, but the term India, what is really like a very like an incredibly modern term. Like like the term India has what 100 years. It was popularized on the last 100 years, so it's very new. While China, you know, for the most part, and right, it's not like that. But the Chinese language, for example, it's very popular throughout the territory that we now call China. While in India, you have a lot of different languages like Hindu, Tamil, and Bengali, and many others that I'm forgetting, but they all have dozens of millions of speakers. While in China, there's also different languages and dialects of Chinese, but Han Chinese, or no, it's a Mandarin Chinese. Sorry, Han Chinese is it's like the ethnicity, right? Uh, it's a lot more white spoken.
China, India didn't form a unified or centralized political entity in its early history.
Yep. Revenge of the family.
The Qin dynasty was very short-lived. Over the course of the previous 500 years, the Qin state united China, but its dynastic empire only lasted 20 years.
Whoa.
The Qin had built a
20
legalist
years.
state with an efficient meritocratic bureaucracy that circumvented family lineages in favor of those with the best record. It split the land into prefectures and appointed governors based on merit, while trying to break apart the entrenched family lineages and aristocratic structures of China. Over the course of Qin rule, over 100,000 families were displaced from their land and deported to faraway regions in attempts to break up lineages. It standardized the written and spoken language throughout its domain, thereby creating the foundation of what would become China. The Qin emperor then ordered the burning
We
of
were just
all
talking about
Confucian
that.
philosophy and history books in an attempt to crack down on the ideas forming the traditional family hierarchies. This, in part, is why Confucian scholars wrote so negatively about the Qin. The Qin introduced an incredibly strict code of law in an attempt to expand and cement their strict meritocratic legalism all across China. One of these laws punished being late with death. And when an army commander
Whoa.
in 210 BC noticed he was going to be late and realized that the punishment for being late was the same as the punishment for rebellion, he decided to rebel. That rebellion turned into an uprising that brought down the Qin and replaced it with the Han dynasty. Let's stop there for a moment, because there are two very important things you should learn from this. First is why early state formation makes China unique. This is an aspect that many people outside of Asia overlook or even have trouble understanding. When the Qin collapsed and the Han took over, the Han continued the empire rather than have China divided up into separate kingdoms again. And this is how China would continue throughout the next 2,000
To be China.
years.
Yeah.
Yes, it did on occasion fall apart into warring states, but those conflicts were civil conflicts over who should rule a united China rather than wars of dissolving China. China as a state, social contracts, society and political construct has continuously existed for 2,000 years. One could even say
While in
3,000
India,
years. There is no other
it's not like that.
society who can claim this. Yes, you get occasional claims to the past. The French claim their ancestry from the Celtic Gauls, and the Iranians claim ancestry to the Achaemenid Empire. But those are claims of cultural heritage, not claims to a continuous social, cultural, or political structure. France did not exist
Absolutely.
2,000 years ago. It barely even existed 1,000 years ago. Iran as a nation-state is a construct of the 19th century and has undergone numerous transformations in political and social structure in the last 3,000 years.
Oh, yeah.
Compare the history of China throughout the last 3,000 years to that of Europe and you will see what I mean. The political structures, state and social contract developed in China were so resilient and strong that they lasted almost unchanged throughout 3,000 years of social and state continuity. To
Yeah, it's a
degree
big
even
deal.
to this very day. To illustrate how special this is, imagine the Roman Empire had never split up and stopped existing. Imagine it still existed today and dominated over Europe, the Middle East and North Africa as one singular political and cultural entity within a state. China created the first state. It did so millennia before everyone else did, and the structures of that initial first state endure to this very day. Which is why China may be the only country in the world that isn't just a nation state, but a civilization state. That the glue that holds China together is something far stronger than nationalism, language, or mere ideology, namely its culture. Something that is expressed in the famous quote by the political scientist Lucien Pai
All
that
right, let's.
China is a civilization disguising itself as a nation.
Wow. Wow.
Second, the establishment of the empire by the Qin, its collapse and its subsequent continuation of the empire by the Han reinforced a continuation of a political conflict over structure that in many ways endures to this day. The conflict between the state and family, or patrimonialism against meritocracy, or legalism versus Confucianism. Ancient China under the Zhou period had been structured in family lineages under traditions that were eventually formulated into Confucianism, a code of conduct by which a functioning family and patrimonialism stand at the center of a society to ensure social harmony. In the Confucian society, the state and its laws are merely tools of assistance to an emperor who, through the moral upbringing by family virtues, should already have the sound reasoning to govern well. The only checks and balances on the emperor's power were not institutional ones, but moral ones. The emperor could lose the mandate of heaven if he governed badly. The mandate of heaven was not a religious concept, but more of a social contract. The idea behind it was that an emperor could lose the right to rule if he was unable to provide harmony to the empire, i.e. the mandate of heaven. Consequently, rebellion to re-establish...
And again, look at that and compare it to what Europe was at the time. And that wasn't really the case. Religion was very important. And, you know, if God said you were the king, you were the king, my man. And you could rule badly or very badly or kind of okay, and you would still be the king. And that was not the case in China. And again, I know a few of these things, but I'm completely ignorant overall when it comes to China. So if y'all have any books that you recommend on China, I'm definitely looking forward. I was just finishing reading Battle Cry for Freedom about the American Civil War, so I'm looking forward to another sort of big book that I could read about history. And man, because of this video, I'm really looking forward to learning about China.
The mandate of heaven was justified. The Qin, however, created the legalist state envisioned by Shang Han and Han Fei. In this state, what mattered was merit, education, record, and not the family. The law was not merely a guideline, but a strict code of conduct for everyone. It emphasized education in school within institutions of learning and the reliance upon state bureaucracy to serve the state for a greater purpose. Those who rule ought to prove themselves worthy of rule through merit, and that idea of a strict meritocratic state with a well-educated and efficient bureaucracy very much endured after the Qin, and is the guiding principle of Chinese statesmanship, and the main obstacle to Chinese family patrimonialism. These two political concepts remained in competition with each other over the question of how China should be governed for centuries. The Han dynasty kept the empire. It kept its institutions, but Confucianism made a huge comeback under the Han. The bureaucracy of the Han state was dominated by Confucian bureaucrats, who did not seek to merely exercise the raw power of the state, but were custodians of family lineages and moral traditions. The central government was increasingly institutionalized to facilitate things such as better tax collection and civil control of the army, but the Han state did not standardize all of China into a unified and standardized system of governance, permitting localized rulers through family lineages and traditions to remain. The result was that the centralized state increasingly resembled what we today would call a modern bureaucratic state, but regional governments away from...
Does he has any books that he recommends? I don't think so. Man, he has a lot of links. All right, well, I'll check him out later.
from the capital, Luoyang, remained on occasion almost tribal. In a way, the Qin dynasty had pushed its state-building project too far into centralization, thereby disrupting patrimonial regional elites who then rebelled. But the Han then drove their state-building project too much into the opposite direction, weakening the central state into being unable to face off against regionalized patrimonial elites. The Han dynasty ended up collapsing into the famous Free Kingdom period. That period, in many ways, was a collapse back into patrimonial family power structures, as China
Oversimplified?
collapsed into warring states governed by family clans rather than by meritocratic institutions. This struggle and structure of feuding family clans continued until China was reunited by Zhang Yilang and the founding of the Sui dynasty.
Creating India. Nice.
The political power structures created by the Brahmanic religions for the various princely states of India had numerous checks and balances, so many in fact that they inhibited the creation of a centralized, powerful and institutionalized state. There were no instruments of mass mobilization that rulers could use to engage in large projects. The main driving force in how India's early society developed were social forces and not political or economic forces. China started creating a strong state to rule society, whereas India created a strong society that prevented the creation of a powerful state. But some certainly tried. 16 Indian princely states became powerful enough to vie for power to unite the subcontinent into one entity, of which the kingdom of Magadha was the most successful. Over the course of 300 years, from 600 BC to 300 BC, the Magadha kingdom introduced a system of taxation within a bureaucracy, replacing a previous system based on voluntary donations by caste to the king. They conquered the Ganges Delta, formed the short-lived Nanda Empire, and then, under Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, conquered almost the entire subcontinent, founding the Mauryan Empire in 321 BC. But the Mauryans didn't take the same path as the Qin had. They did not standardize their language as the main language of administration of India. In fact, there doesn't seem to have been much of an administration at all. Offices of governance were attained on the basis of noble birth. There was possibly not even a centralized government at all, and nothing was done to spread education or in any way challenge the system of castes that prevented the establishment of a powerful state. In fact, the Mauryans do not seem to have tried to enact measures of direct rule or even indirect control over the lands they had conquered. Defeated kings merely had to ceremoniously acknowledge the Mauryans as sovereigns, and then they could return back to ruling their own kingdoms as kings in all but name. There was no European-style feudal structure of bowing to superior family lines or land being redistributed by a central ruler. Local property rights were in general not challenged, even by local kings, who themselves under the Brahmanic laws only owned uncleared lands such as forests and jungles, and often continued living off voluntary donations by castes. In many ways, the conquered princely states
Voluntary
remained
donations.
independent princely states in all but name. After the death of Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire collapsed, and India reverted straight back into regionalized kingdoms and princely states as if nothing had ever happened. The fact that the Mauryan Empire had existed at all was for a long time forgotten in the annals of history, until stone tablets with inscribed commandments were deciphered in 1915. For Indians, the concept of
1915.
sovereignty over a unified India did not make sense at the time. The concept of an India united in law and state possibly didn't even make any sense at all. India reverted back into regional kingdoms and tribal politics under a religious social hierarchy, at the same time that a Chinese state started building the first segments of a border wall. One of the key differences developing here between Chinese and Indian political history is that China spent the majority of its history unified, with disunity being an exception and usually resulting in a struggle to reunify. While in India, disunity became the standard and the unified India
It's
became
the opposite.
exception. 300
Yes.
years after the collapse of the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire would be the next to unify India. However, the Gupta were also prevented from attempting to build a unified Indian state structure by the wall that the unified Chinese state had built. That wall made it more difficult for Hunnic tribes of Central Asia to raid China. So they went south,
Don't
invaded
challenge the
India, and
Mongols.
caused the collapse of the Gupta. India reverted back to regionalized tribal states and
Don't
kingdoms
challenge
again,
the
and
Mongols.
remained as such for 1,000 years. In the 10th century, a series of Turkic invasions coming out of Afghanistan and Iran resulted in the conquest of India by Islamic states. This began a process by which foreign rulers would drive the political developments of India, the first of which was the Delhi Sultanate, which failed. Facing entrenched regionalized tribal structures and social hierarchies, the Delhi Sultanate was never able to fully enforce the structures of an Islamic state over the lands it had conquered. It was forced to govern through concession and compromise with regional Hindu rulers and accept limitations.
You
to
can
their
see the
political
pattern here.
power. And the same is very much true for the Mughal Empire that conquered and replaced the Delhi Sultanate. The foreign invaders may have had the military structure that they had developed from outside to conquer much of India, but their political structures were insufficient in dismantling the social forces in India and to bind them under a unified and centralized political institution. The Mughals became rich and powerful through the control of the Indian spice trade and the Silk Road. They were able to crush rebellions against them with military might, but to rule India, they ultimately had to compromise and bend to do so. The structures of what makes an Islamic state ultimately failed and proved insufficient to rule India. The legacy of foreign invasion, nevertheless, matters enormously in the creation of a unified India. When the Mughals started to decline, someone else from overseas started lurking on the horizon. It is very possible that if outside forces had not invaded and occupied India, that India as the idea of a unified
Wouldn't
entity
exist,
would
yeah.
have never come into existence. It is through foreign invasion that the project of building India as a state ultimately
Shit,
began.
I should have
And it
worn my
began
Union Jack shirt.
very late.
Damn it.
The Sui
Alright.
dynasty did not last long. Its second emperor, Yang, was a megalomaniac who used the power of the state to build a massive wall that caused a famine, and even more stupid, invaded Vietnam and Korea, which ended in disaster and bankruptcy of the state. A rebellion followed that established the Tang dynasty. The Tang were descendants from a prominent aristocratic family of northern China, and they reinforced the system of family appointments within the structures of the states in the Confucian tradition. However, far from providing a basis for good leadership resulting out of social harmony through family traditions, the reintroduction of this system resulted in ever more insipid scheming among families around the royal court to bring themselves into positions of power, culminating with the woman known in Chinese records as the evil Empress Wu, who took control of the royal court through various plots involving the murder of her political rivals, the killing of
Wow.
the heir to the throne, and the appointment of her own son as the heir. Under her rule, the state administration saw most of its Confucian scholars and aristocrats murdered.
So China
or
went
kicked
a
out
little
and
bit
replaced
nuts.
with loyal agents of her own willing to do her bidding. What we see in this case is how the powerful state that had been created in China could be very well used by an elite to inflict a rule of terror upon the wider country, even against a set of elites who had entrenched themselves through family connections into such positions. Not surprisingly, her rule caused a rebellion that ultimately led to the overthrow of the Tang and the establishment of the Song dynasty, who themselves were conquered by the Mongols, who founded the
There it
Yuan
is.
dynasty, which,
There it
despite
is.
adapting well into Chinese society, continued to be seen as foreign occupiers and were eventually overthrown in rebellion
They
by
kinda
the Ming
were.
dynasty. The Ming refocused on the building of the legalist Chinese state on a foundation of meritocracy, with the building of canals and their famous foreign expeditions. They also cut the
I think it'd be interesting if he did also a docuseries on the Mongol Empire.
size of the state in half in an attempt to make it more efficient. To prevent the establishment of increasingly inept or powerful but still entrenched family lineages in the state bureaucracy, the Ming resorted to the posting
Yo, we
of
got
eunuchs
4
as
viewers.
ministers
Thank
of
you
the
guys.
state. The use of eunuchs
I hope
in
y'all
positions
are
of
enjoying
power
the
had been
stream.
common in China. An assumption was that a eunuch, by the very fact of his living condition, could not aspire towards entrenching and advancing family interests within the apparatus of the state. The Ming created an effective bureaucracy and state around the use of eunuch bureaucrats. The Ming emperors trusted these eunuchs more than any aristocratic families under the assumption that they would not betray them. Over 100,000 eunuchs ended up
Thank you for your
serving
comment,
in the
bro.
Ming dynasty state. The Ming emperors
Snowed
started
on.
sending these eunuchs out as spies to aristocratic families and to punish those who may have transgressed in the name of the emperor. By the 15th century, the eunuchs had developed into a massive secret police organization called the Eastern Depot that inflicted a rule of terror upon the country. The emperors lost control over the state institution that they had created. The eunuchs gained increasing control over the royal court, became increasingly corrupt, and the stability of the state increasingly declined, which led to rebellion and the Qing dynasty. What we see here in the examples of the Ming and the Tang is that both a state built on a foundation of Confucian principle, family lineages and patrimonialism, as well as a state built on legalist principle of meritocracy, are capable of collapsing into despotism and state terror. One of the key weaknesses of the Chinese state is its lack of any upward accountability. The Chinese state is a state built around power collecting at the top, and at which the authority of the state is acted out from the top to the bottom. The unique development of the Chinese state allowed for the establishment of a highly centralized and very powerful state, a state capable of mass mobilization to build massive projects such as the Great Wall or the modern-day Three Gorges Dam or the modern-day high-speed rail networks, but also a state capable of exceptional despotism and state terror, with a lack of most, if not any, accountability. From the Empress Wu to the Eastern Deep.
What I love about Kraut in his series is that we saw this on the Mexican-American border series. A lot of what has to do with the modern states of the U.S. and Mexico, for example, has to do with what were they in the past. And with China, we're seeing a very similar thing. Modern-day China didn't just appear in the 20th century, but even if the communist, it's the Communist Party, right? It probably has another name like the People's Communist Party or something. But when it took power, it kept a lot of the older ways of China, and we're seeing it with here.
Depot to the Cultural Revolution to the modern crackdowns on any dissent. People who wish to challenge the Chinese state can only do so through slowly complaining upward from the bottom through all the institutions of the Chinese state to the top of that state. And this means that the state is only as strong as the incorruptibility of its state institutions and bureaucrats. For the Chinese state to function, it must remain meritocratic, but it has to balance that with avoiding despotism, as well as the entrenchment of patrimonial or clientist.
Yeah, and you can explain it with a lot more other countries.
Public or populist mechanism by which the state can be made to change course.
I think I've heard this song before.
The British were the last foreign conquerors of India, and the British understood very soon what the social structure of the subcontinent was. British colonial accounts of India today are often just dismissed away and branded as mere Orientalism. But doing that is very silly and self-limiting. These colonial accounts actually reveal a lot about the Indian state.
The British Raj.
The British referred to India as a subcontinent of many political entities in which each village is a republic. Far from such accounts being a simplistic assertion of colonial superiority, as some may naively and falsely argue today, what it actually reveals is that the British instantly understood the decentralized social structure of India, and that helped them enforce their rule over it better than the Mughals before them, because they quickly learned how to take advantage of and exploit that decentralized Indian society.
The crown
British didn't
jewel of the
establish a
empire.
centralized system of control over India. They established a system of princely states and regions. They made Brahmanic religious laws the official law of Hindus and made Islamic law the laws of Muslims. In many ways, the British reinforced the decentralized structure of India while simultaneously keeping control over India for their own extractive economic institutions. They built a modern economy, but not a modern state. However, the result of unifying India on paper into one singular colony had the effect of reinforcing the idea of India as a singular
5
social
viewers,
entity
welcome
among
guys.
Indians, even as the state institutions of a united India remained weak. And that would eventually lead to the removal of the British and the establishment of modern India. India as a nation-state is in many ways the result of foreign conquests. And this is a very touchy subject. On the one hand, you have British Empire revisionists who will praise the creation of the Indian nation-state as a supposed positive legacy of British
I don't know if they should
colonialism.
brag about
On the
that.
other hand, you will find Hindu nationalists who defend a notion of the pre-colonial Indian village as the foundation of the Indian nation-state. The idea spread by Hindu nationalists is untrue, but the idea that the Indian state that came out of British colonialism in any way reflects positively on British colonialism is also nonsense. The British deliberately kept the administration weak, and the state born from British colonialism consequently was a weak state. You will often hear British Empire revisionists talk about English common law and the supposedly great legal framework they left behind in India. What they will not tell you is that the Indian judiciary is notoriously incompetent. Law isn't just built on a theory of law, but on the bureaucratic institutions that enforce, enact, and interpret it. Courts in India are often stacked with paperwork, and the line of cases to be heard is immensely long. Court cases can often take years, if not even decades, to finally be heard. It is in fact not uncommon in India for plaintiffs to die while waiting for their case to finally go to court. This is because the bureaucracy of the Indian court system, which is a legacy of British colonialism, was built as a weak and kleptocratic institution. The administration of other centralized government sectors and services does not fare any better. The state has trouble building basic infrastructure, providing healthcare, providing education, and has still to this day not ended illiteracy in many parts of India. This is not due to there being some internal logic of incompetence to India.
I've always said that India has a lot of potential, but it has a lot of problems to solve in a way that China never really had. And I think part of the problem, and again, I'm ignorant and you shouldn't listen to me, but it's this sort of multi-state, multi-culture empire that was really born with a let's kick out the British mindset. As far as I know and as far as I could analyze the situation, it could be different. And I would love to hear the opinion of my Indian viewers. What do you guys think about the whole thing?
Indian culture, but because the Indian nation-state was built on the foundations of a weak state. And that state was deliberately kept weak to placate a strong society.
To take advantage of the Indians, yeah.
India is overall still a post-colonial success story, especially in its economy. But it is a success story despite a British colonial legacy and not because of a British colonial legacy. However, the weak state aside, Indian society has many mechanisms available to resist and change the direction of the state. Indian governments have to frequently placate the demands of local governments to get anything done. And even outside of government, Indian society is a strong society, a society with many avenues of protests and public accountability that can be used to prevent
unlike China
despotism. The political history of the Indian Republic is filled with many examples of highly
we're talking about the world's biggest
politicians
democracy
taking a jump into federal politics and failing miserably. Many success stories built in India are due to regional legacies and efforts. For example, the state of Uttar Pradesh is often noted for having more effective and efficient governments than most other places in India. And we can trace this back to completely different legacies in social structure. For example, that literacy was not restricted to the Brahmins and widely spread across the population in Uttar Pradesh, thereby making governance more effective in the long term. India is also a society in which people can by their own means reach incredible heights and prosper without having to fear any draconian state power preventing them from doing so. You can start a business as an Indian and build that business without fearing the government, but that government is often too weak to provide the education people need to build a business in the first place, or to prevent local gangsters from racketeering your business, or to provide basic services such as a sewage system that you may need to run your business in the first place.
Unfortunately,
As a
sounds very
result of
familiar.
this, Indian success is often built on the strength of its society. People prosper through the efforts of communities and families working together to create success. But with its weak state, India is also unable to build the infrastructure needed, and which is the duty of the state to provide to further and secure success by its citizens. In many ways, because India was late to the state construction.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, the communities build India, not really the government. For example, the other day I was reading that the divorce rate in India is like 1%. While in America, for example, it's something like 50-60%, depending on if it's first marriage, second marriage. First marriages, I think it's like 40%. So, because Indian communities are really strong. And when you marry an Indian person, and again, if you're from India, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, the families are involved. And these are often large families that, are involved in the whole relationship, in the whole marriage. So communities are the ones that build India. Now, for example, think about if one person of the family gets wealthier because he or she builds a business, then the community prospers. So that prosperity comes from individuals providing to the community and communities working for communities, not really because the government is effective. So, tell me guys what you think about that. That's how I think it is. Communities building India, not really thanks to the government, because the government, like he says, it's kind of weak. While in China, the government is just strong. Like you can't do anything without the government. I mean, as a foreigner, for example, you can really enter India without being interviewed by the police. And a friend that's Mexican, and he went from China, and because he was Mexican and he's sort of viewed as this dangerous third world country, he had to be like interviewed by the police, and he was sort of followed by the police while he stayed in China, which is it's just kind of nuts.
Process, the Indian state is still being constructed to this day.
Yep. Yeah, I like. Oh, now I understand
What
the title,
happened
bro.
in the unique political developments of these two societies is the exact opposite process. In China, society was subsumed by the state. In India, the state was subsumed by society. India has a weak state, but a strong society. China has a strong state, but a weak society. India does not have the state capacity for mass mobilization to build massive state infrastructure projects such as the Three Gorges Dam or the world's largest high-speed rail network as China does. But if Chinese citizens were to ever take to the streets to protest the policies of the Chinese state, as Indians often do, they would not find the same success that Indians sometimes do, but would be met with the iron fist of the Chinese state. The Chinese state is absolute and powerful, but it lacks systems of public accountability and can therefore easily collapse into tyranny and abuse of power under the wrong leadership. China faces the challenge of having to provide a place and living standard for its citizens where they either do not see a need for such public accountability or they need to eventually start providing such. That, however, would mean fundamental restructuring of the state and can probably not be done without the collapse of communist rule. Additionally, throughout its history, China faced the problem of clientelism, mainly through family clans entrenching themselves within and subverting the structures of the state. The Confucian family structure is by far the greatest internal threat to the Chinese state. Meanwhile, India faces the challenge of constructing a state that can provide services to its
For all.
people without cracking down upon and limiting the system of public accountability too much, yet still having to limit them to a degree to not have the state choke out on its society.
What do you think? I can't really, I don't know much about ancient history, but lately China has been in a little bit of hot water, especially because of its economy. I don't know what's the name of it's a Chinese, either it's an investment fund or a bank. I think it's more of a real estate group that's sort of failing, and it's having the same problem that the Lehman Brothers Bank had in 2008 in the US. The sort of idea that the banks are too big. Yeah, the Evergrande. Yeah, I hope that's how you pronounce it. In Spanish, would be Evergrande. Yeah, and sort of, Xi Jinping and the whole Chinese government are building the state based on stability. But now that stability is starting to, sort of be challenged by the economy that's itself taking a hard hit. So I think it's going to be interesting to follow the whole situation and see what happens with China, because now the state is not going to be prospering or growing or providing this massive economy, this massive economic boom to the population that it's promoted for years, right? We've been hearing about China growing economically for years now. I mean, for over like what 2 decades now. That's not going to last forever, because that's not how the economy works. So it's going to be really interesting to know what's going to happen when we know the economic situation has slowed down, right? The economic growth has slowed down. But what happens if there's a crisis in China? I mean, COVID didn't really impact China that much. At least, well, at the beginning it did, but now it didn't. So what's going to happen now? It's kind of scary to think about it, because we all sort of depend on China, even the US, and it's scary to think about. But let's see what happens to the almighty powerful Chinese state.
Far more likely have that society stop the state building process in its tracks. The Indian state in many ways is an unfinished project that is still under construction. In a way, we are privileged to live in a time in which we can bear
Yes,
witness
absolutely,
to the
sir.
process
It's
of
going to be
construction
really
of the
interesting.
Indian state.
And
If
I'm
you
going
are an
to follow it
Indian viewer,
closely.
you even have influence over that, something a Chinese viewer can only dream of. We may get to see what the Indian state becomes.
I mean, there might be even opportunity for India here to sort of, because Chinese labor, for example, it's not as cheap as it used to be. And if China starts to fail, right, in a simplistic way, then India might take advantage of that. Also, I've heard, for example, even places like Mexico, for example, could take advantage of that. But it's going to be interesting to know what China does as it transitions from this lower class economy to a middle and upper class economy. Because, for example, I was reading the average Chinese now lives better than the average Mexican, supposedly, right? And yeah, China is the whole economy was built on the idea that China is the factory of the world. But that's not really the case. And if the economy of China starts to have problems, it's going to be really interesting to see.
If it comes to be, and if it can find a balance between accountability and authority. Will India
And other places like Vietnam, India, Malaysia, Latin America might take advantage of
common
this.
state structure, or will Hindu nationalism force itself upon the rest of society as a standard of the state at the expense of others? Or will it be something completely different that binds these diverse societies together into a state? With China, we get to watch in our time what the Chinese
Vietnam
state
is growing
will do to
a lot.
placate its society into harmony. We see some of the age-old social and political conflicts acting out to this day. Maoism can be seen in a way through the lens of the Confucian family in conflict with state legalism, as an attempt by the state to subvert the traditional Chinese family structure with the state, something that ultimately failed. And ever since China opened, it is undergoing a Confucian revival, as the state is trying to bind the ideas of social harmony through family and obedience into the doctrine of the Communist Party and state.
Plus, on top of all those issues that we just mentioned, you also have to take into account the demographic issues. China's population is aging fast, like really quick, thanks to the in part the one-child policy. And people just have been used to that one child policy for decades. So on top of all the economic issues that are sort of unstable right now, you also have to add the demographic thing. And remember, China has over a billion people, 1.4 billion, something like that. So if we're talking about dozens of millions of people getting old real quick, that's also gonna be part of the issue.
Though China has a weak society, the Confucian family is
Unbound
nonetheless one of the single
fanboys,
most
dude.
powerful
What the
socio-economic
hell?
entities in history. Conservatism in the rest of the world is a system of beliefs that has, despite its name's meaning,
Oh, Canadian
constantly had
elections.
to rebrand and reinvent itself, while East Asian Confucian
Trudeau
conservatism
won
has
again,
pretty
man.
much stayed the same for 4,000 years, and ultimately forced the powerful communist state to bend somewhat to it. You can
It's not
see
really a
Confucian
communist
legacies
state.
throughout East Asian states, such as in Singapore or in Korea, where right-leaning political forces tend to be more Confucian, while left-leaning movements tend to be more legalist. However, if the reinvigorated
Oh
China
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think Japan has also the sort of anti-immigration problem, but Japan has lately sort of opened up a little bit. I haven't noticed China opening up to immigrants lately, and that's not only the state, but I think society. I don't want to use the word racist, like I don't want to say Chinese society is racist, but China is a very homogenous state, right? And they are used to that. So I don't think they will open up to immigrants anytime soon. I mean, it's Japan is struggling with that, and the government is sort of opening up, but the society, yeah, xenophobic, yeah, probably xenophobic. I don't think like racist, but xenophobic, and yeah, it's crazy. It's probably one of those places that even if you're white, like you might experience uh, some sort of trouble. Like I've heard people that are white that work in China as like I don't know English teachers or whatever, and like they experience sometimes this xenophobic from the people of China. Some sort of
society
it's a
under the
bias.
current Confucian Renaissance will be a foundation from which to challenge the state for accountability is yet to be seen. Within our current geopolitical landscape, the conflict over influence and power between India and China becomes doubly interesting with all of this in mind.
Oh yeah,
Because
absolutely.
all internal conflicts aside, it poses the question of what is more valuable and important in
State
economic and political
society?
development. Is it the state or is it society? The next two videos on this channel will be an examination of Scandinavian democracy using Denmark as the main example of how a democratic
wait for
social
those.
contract different from those developed in England and France came to be. And a little opinion piece critiquing an American public intellectual who I can't stand. But I will be also
Oh, I am waiting for that as well. Is it gonna be a liberal figure, a conservative figure? That's gonna be interesting as well. I mean, man, let's give it for Kraut. He really needs more subscribers. Whoever's watching right now, gotta subscribe to Kraut, man. Listen, I'm not even subscribed. I'm gonna subscribe right now because that was really good. I learned a whole lot more than I was actually expecting to. Oh, Noam Chomsky? Oh, it may be. It may be. Either way, I'm excited to know. I also think he's planning another video on, I don't know if it's Latin America, and I wanted to contact him on Twitter and say, bro, I want to take part. I want to translate. I don't care. But I don't know. Should I give him? Because my channel is really small, and maybe he wants to collab with a Spanish-speaking channel. That plus I do videos in English, not in Spanish. So I don't think that would work. But wow. Again, I'm not lectured on ancient history in both India and China, so I just took a lot of knowledge, and we truly saw the difference about the state and the society, and how China and India are the sort of opposites when it comes to state and society. Probably. I think so. I think so. I might hit him up. That'd be interesting. I told my brother. My brother is Mexican, but he doesn't speak English as fluently. So I was like, man, you gotta watch this video. It's amazing. It's like the Mexican American border series. Like, you gotta watch it, bro. It's really good. And he wanted to watch it, but he's like, bro, it's in English, and I don't know. It's a complex subject, and so I was like, gosh, I wish I could translate that video just for him to watch it. And I know a lot of people in Mexico would learn a lot too. And not only Mexico, Latin America, Hispanics in the US, Spanish speakers across the world would really take a lot. But wow, I'm honestly really surprised. I don't want to make this stream longer than it already is. But thank you guys so much. Thank you, Snowdon, for being here with me and watching the video with me. It was truly, you truly made it a lot more interesting. I think when you talk about a subject, you really understand it more. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about India and about China on the coming years and decades. And we'll see if the Chinese miracle was really a miracle or more of an illusion. And we'll see how India handles that transition. Because again, when there's an empty spot, for example, if China leaves some sort of power vacuum in the next few years to come, will China fill that gap? Will other countries fill that gap? It's going to be interesting to know. But guys, take care. Have a good day. I don't think I'm going to go to the gym, bro. I'm just tired. But y'all have a good one. Yeah, subscribe. You can check my links. I'm opening actually a Spanish speaking channel, for myself, basically doing the exact same thing, but in Spanish. So if any of you speak Spanish, you can check it out. Again, thank you, Snowdon, for being here, and thank you for all the viewers that gave a like and subscribed and checked the links in the description. I'll see you in the next video.